Hello, BookTube. This is the Star Trek book tag. This is an original tag created by me, and if there are any other Star Trek book tags, my response will be down below in a link. I'm going to do 7 prompts or questions. They'll each relate to the 7 television series, starting with the original series, and then following on with The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, and Picard. And during each prompt, if you want to talk about, if you are a fan of Star Trek and have experience with these shows, you can obviously talk about your takes, how you feel about the various Star Trek series. So let's begin with prompt number 1, the original series. I obviously did not grow up with the first Star Trek series. I came to it much later, and while there are some good episodes, some very good episodes, I don't have as strong an emotional attachment to the original series as a lot of Star Trek fans do. But it has been incredibly influential on a lot of scientists and science fiction writers, so that informed my idea for this prompt. So, prompt number 1. Since Star Trek has been so influential in the careers of many scientists and science fiction writers, pick a book that is influential to you or has influenced you, either personally, career path, dream career, whatever, profession you wanted. So, in my case, I was tempted to pick something involving literary criticism, but I really don't have any books like that anymore. I have 2 big anthologies and Anatomy of Criticism. But I decided to go with writing. And for that, I went with the Conan stories by Robert E. Howard. These are the 3 volumes of the Conan series that Del Rey put out, starting with Conan, The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian, The Conquering Sword of Conan, and The Bloody Crown of Conan. While I did come to the Conan stories by Robert E. Howard rather later than I would have liked, the movie version starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer, were incredibly influential on me when I was a child. And they influenced me not only in my desire to write science fiction and fantasy, but also my history in mythology, my history in ancient history. So, all in all, the Conan series has been quite influential on my development in many of my interests. Prompt number 2, The Next Generation. Now, while I was, too young to really have a strong attachment to the original series, Star Trek The Next Generation was the Star Trek I grew up with. Although, again, I kind of a little bit late, but this is the first Star Trek series I watched. It was on reruns or syndication on USA years ago. And I watched quite a bit of it and really enjoyed it, loved it. Although, probably hasn't really aged all that well in hindsight. I haven't watched it in years, though. So, prompt number 2. Keeping with prompt number 1, or building on prompt number 1, pick a book in the same genre as the previous book that came out between 20 to 100 years later. Okay? So as Star Trek The Next Generation came out roughly about 20 years after the original series, and is set 100 years later than the original series, that works on that. So my pick for this is the Elric series by Michael Moorcock. I have 3 books. A Stormbringer, Sailor on the Seas of Fate, and The Vanishing Tower. I need to clean those. The Elric series came out, are part of the second wave of sword and sorcery. I mean, you had sort of the first flourishing with Robert E. Howard, who largely invented the genre, and several writers and weird tales that sort of continued on from there. Clark Ashton Smith, some of the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories. And then there was an abeyance, and then you had sort of a flourishing again in the 60s with Michael Moorcock. The Elric is more on the sorcery side than Conan is as a character. But he's also a proficient swordsman, and he's, I would say, more anti-heroic in a way. So, now, prompt number 3, DS9. I came to DS9 relatively late in its run. I think it started with like season 5 when it was airing. And then a few years ago, binged the entire series. And personally, this is my favorite of the Star Trek series that I've seen. It, rather than compared to the first 2 series, which took place on the Starship Enterprise and its 5-year mission or continuing mission of exploration, DS9 was set on the titular space station DS9, which orbited initially the planet Bajor and eventually the wormhole from Bajor to the Gamma Quadrant. And DS9 had a very strong sense of location, setting, place, and a lot of very interesting recurring characters. So for prompt number 9, pick a book. Prompt number 3. Oh, Lord have mercy. Pick a book with a strong sense of setting. And for that, I picked Blackfish City by Sam J. Miller. This is a near future, I want to say it's called cli-fi or climatic science fiction. Some people might call it a dystopia, but it's not really a dystopia. It's set in the city of Kanak, which is a large platform city in the North Atlantic. After the climate wars and the general breakdown of civilization, and it's about a woman who writes this whale who is in search of her missing children and working through the people who ruined her family. And it is very, very interesting and has, I think, a very strong sense of setting and characters. Although, I think I mentioned this earlier, I kind of do find that a bit frustrating too, though. Prompt number 4, Voyager. Now, Voyager, I think of all of the Star Trek series, this is the one I've watched more in its original run. I think I've watched several seasons worth, whereas Next Gen it was more spotty. DS9, I came like the last 2 seasons. Voyager, I think I got about 3 or 4 seasons in, and kind of didn't watch quite the first season or first 2 seasons and then the later seasons, but I did catch the series finale, and I quite liked it. I've been meaning to binge watch the entirety of Voyager at some point. But I don't think it's nearly as bad as some people make it out. So, obviously, as Star Trek Voyager is about a voyage, I pick a book about a voyage. And of course, there is no other book about a voyage but the Odyssey by Homer, which is the story of Odysseus' 10-year journey from Troy to home to Ithaca, and all of the side adventures he went through on that process. Awesome book. Prompt number 5, Enterprise. So after this really great period of Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, which all took place in the 2360s and 2370s, the powers that be within Star Trek decided to go in a different direction for the follow-up series and go to a prequel. And so Star Trek Enterprise is about the first voyages of the first Starship Enterprise, taking place 100 years before the original series. So this is before the Federation, before Kirk's ship. And I didn't particularly care for it initially. The first 2 seasons were pretty terrible, or the episodes I saw were not very good. The Xindi arc, I thought it intrigued me. And then I think the last season was really strong when they started 2-part and 3-part episodes. So for Enterprise, this prompt, returning to prompts 1 and 2, pick a book from the same genre as books 1 and 2, either from the that came out 20 to 100 years before the first book mentioned. So in that case, I'm going to kind of fudge it a little bit and go with A Princess of Mars in the Barsoom series by John Carter. These came out the first book came out in about 1915, and obviously is one of the first examples of science fantasy. And I will talk more about my opinions on Princess of Mars in Friday's video. So, prompt number 6. So after Star Trek Enterprise ended in 2005, there were no Star Trek series for almost 15 years. There were, of course, the reboot movies, but no Star Trek set in the original timeline until 2018, when Star Trek Discovery began. So Star Trek Discovery, much like Star Trek Enterprise, is more of a prequel. It takes place before the original series, 10 years earlier, and has been noted for creating quite a lot of conflict and dissension and controversy within the Star Trek fandom, for reasons that I am not entirely sure why. Star Trek has always been socially progressive. It may not look it from 2020, but it has been always socially progressive and controversial. The original series had one of the first interracial kisses on television and an integrated crew. The continuing series have also been, had progressive social values. Heck, the Federation is a socialist utopia. Maybe some of the writing, particularly for Michael Burnham's character, might be somewhat poor or whatever, but I mean, it's like, I mean, this whole sort of, rage, it's like, I mean, this is Star Trek. I mean, yeah, sometimes it does get clunky. The writing for these episodes that touch on social justice issues or social issues or cultural issues or whatever can get quite clunky and may not necessarily work because they're trying to take a middle path or whatever, but I mean, it's not entirely sure what the whole issue is, but it did inspire me in what a great prompt for discovery would be, which is pick a book that bitterly divided a fandom, a community, or scholarship, or whatever. So, yeah. So in this case, I'm going with Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James, which, while not necessarily as a bitter division within science fiction and fantasy fandom that I could have gone with, I mean, there's very obviously a few obvious examples I could have gone with, but I just decided to go with Black Leopard, Red Wolf, which has quite divided science fiction and fantasy fandom. It's about a man named Tracker who is hired along with others to search for a missing boy, a prince, and later a quest for revenge after that boy has been found. And it is quite good. And finally, prompt number 7, Star Trek Picard. So this is a follow-up sequel to Star Trek The Next Generation, and the first time Patrick Stewart has been involved in Star Trek as an actor for about 20 years. And one thing I've noticed about Picard is that it wears its influences openly. Obviously, the main plot is very reminiscent of Battlestar Galactica. Soji and Daj are very similar to human form Cylons. Elnor is very Tolkien-esque. I mean, heck, his name is Sindarin for Star Trekker. His fighting style is very inspired by wuxia. I think there are some Firefly elements in there too. And of course, as some people I've seen pointed out, this could very much be Old Man Picard, which is a reference to Old Man Logan and the last Wolverine movie, Logan. So with that in mind, for the final prompt, pick a book that wears its influences on its sleeve, or is rather obvious about its influences. And for that, I pick The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherynne and Valente. This is a book about several dead women in the underworld who gather and tell each other the stories of their deaths involved in the superhero lifestyle. The title refers to Gail Simone's website from about 20 plus years ago, and her naming of this trope when the girlfriend of the Green Lantern at the time, Kyle Rayner, his girlfriend Alex DeWitt, was murdered and stuffed into a refrigerator by the supervillain Major Force. And these stories that these women tell are incredibly reminiscent of actual comic books. The first is very much Gwen Stacy. The second one is very Phoenix or Jean Grey. There's Harley Quinn, Alex DeWitt, Mira, so on and so forth. So I would say this one has wears its influences quite openly on its sleeve. Now that was the Star Trek book tag. So I'm going to tag some people: Steve Donahue, Mark Richardson, Jason Harrigan, the Bookish Bryants, and Paperback Junkie. Anyway, or if you see this video and you would like to do this tag yourselves, consider yourselves tagged. Until next time, BookTube, I will see you, well, later, because I have like 3 other tags I want to film today, so I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.